Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the National Museum of the Marine Corps. My name is Dr. Sean Callahan. I'm the Director of Marine Corps History Division. I'm really thankful to have you all joining us here tonight. General Lukeman, I'd like to especially point out that we're grateful to have you here in attendance tonight for this lecture.
I'm here just heckling the audience and
Fit right in. So tonight, we are going to be giving the third lecture as part of a 7-lecture series designed to commemorate this 250th birthday of the Marine Corps here at Marine Corps University. We've got these 7 lectures set up as a means of explaining the reason why Marines and the Marine Corps are the way they are today through what we're calling a thematic history approach. Before I begin, I want to make sure to thank our partners and hosts here at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, led by their director, Mr. Kyle Gentry, in the back, for providing us such an awesome venue. And I also want to take a minute to thank the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation and General Lukeman, your team, for providing the grants that make this project possible. From this point forward, every lecture in our series is subsidized by a stipend to do the research and writing from the Heritage Foundation. That's just one of many ways they support our efforts to promote the history of the Marine Corps. So this 7-part series that I mentioned has begun with the first lecture where we heard about how the Marine Corps developed into a combined arms force over the course of its history. In the second lecture, we talked about how the Marine Corps started as an adjunct to the Navy, but eventually emerged as a co-equal sister service and also a ready expeditionary force, a force in readiness. The lectures after this point are going to address several other aspects of our history, namely why the Marine Corps prizes innovation, why the Marine Corps has a self-conception and a public conception as an elite force, and we're also going to talk about why the Marine Corps so jealously guards its reputation with Congress and the American people. But the theme that we're here to focus on tonight is why the Marines developed an emphasis on small unit leadership as a defining quality of today's Corps. And I'm here to tell you that I'm very pleased that I think we found the most qualified historian to speak on that topic, Dr. Pete Owen. So Pete spent more than 20 years as an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, and he's also served as an adjunct faculty member at MCU's own College of Distance Education and Training ever since 2004. I think that's maybe where we first came in contact.
Right.
He has also earned his bachelor's in history from the United States Naval Academy and holds a PhD from the Royal Military College of Canada in War Studies. His historical achievements are distinguished. His first book, right here, To the Limit of Endurance, A Battalion of Marines in the Great War, is one of my favorite books on the topic. And I don't know that he set out to make that a book about combat leadership, but it definitely is. And it's one of the reasons that we have him here tonight. He won, by the way, the Heritage Foundation's General Wallace M. Green Jr. Distinguished Book Award for the year that he published that book, and that's a significant achievement. Pete has a new book coming out soon, Fighting Falcons, the campaigns of VMF 221 in the Pacific War. And if you've seen his work in naval history on the subject of marine aviation in the Pacific War, you know that this is a book that you want to get yourself a copy of. So to kick off tonight's lecture, before Pete begins, I just want to start by saying that we're going to ask you to hold all questions to the designated period at the end. We've saved some time for that. And if there's no questions before I get started, I'd like to ask you all to provide Dr. Pete Owen with a warm round of applause.
Thanks very much, Sean. Okay, those of you who are here early saw me fumbling with my mic. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. I'm very delighted to be here tonight with you guys. It's quite an honor. General Lukeman, great to see you again. Colonel Gentry, thanks for having us here in your fabulous museum. Dr. Callahan, thanks for making me a part of this series. And all of you showing up. I really appreciate this. I hope you enjoy it. As my wife will tell you, nobody loves hearing me talk about Marine Corps history more than me, so I'm going to have a good time. Okay, so Dr. Callahan told you what the topic is tonight. And I want to tell you what my objectives are tonight, in addition to just entertaining you. Okay, so first off, I want to educate the audience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain my research method, and I'm going to present the evidence I've collected so far. I'll offer some conclusions, and then we'll take your questions. Now, What you'll also notice, and my command and staff students would be quick to point out, is I'm not going to give you my thesis up front. All right, so I would beat the heck out of them if they turned in a paper without a thesis statement, but I'm not going to give you my thesis up front because I want you to see the evidence, make up your own mind what you think this means, and then we'll talk about it at the end. And in fact, what I recognize is there's some people in this room who have a very deep understanding of Marine Corps history. And most of you in this room have spent a good deal of your professional lives leading Marines. So I'm going to be leveraging that, I hope, at the end by getting your questions and your comments, because this presentation is going to become a chapter in that anthology that Dr. Callahan talked about. And hopefully, by me listening to you and engaging with you, we're going to make that better. All right. In the foreword to the 2024 Marine Corps Warfighting publication, Leading Marines, General Eric Smith, the Commandant, wrote of, quote, timeless attributes that form the soul of our Corps, those attributes that carried Marines forward through the wheat fields of Bella Wood to the strongholds of Fallujah and Marja. General Smith characterized the Corps' leadership philosophy as an attribute, quote, that distinguishes the U.S. Marine Corps. Leading Marines provides us with an unambiguous explanation of what the Marine Corps means by small unit leadership. While neither of these publications explicitly define small unit leadership, the leadership traits and principles within both editions of Leading Marines provide the Corps' philosophy of leadership, delineating how the Marine Corps expects its officers and non-commissioned officers to lead Marines in the 21st century. The 1995 edition of Leading Marines went so far as to declare that leadership is a heritage, an assertion which first appeared in the 1956 first edition of the Marine Officer's Guide. Colonel Robert Heinel, whose essay on the Corps' recurring fight for existence inspired this lecture series and the anthology the History Division is going to publish this year, co-wrote the first Marine Officer's Guide along with General Gerald C. Thomas and Rear Admiral Arthur Edgton. And I drew the title for tonight's lecture from this passage. Leadership is a heritage which has passed from Marine to Marine since the founding of the Corps. If leadership truly is a heritage of the Corps, then how far back does that go? Does it really extend to the earliest founding of the Corps? To investigate this topic, I posed two questions to guide my research. Has the philosophy of leadership expressed within Leading Marines always been a defining characteristic of the Corps? If not, how have officers and non-commissioned officers led small units across the Corps' history? And I figure the answers should be in the words and in the actions of Marines. By words, I mean what Marines have written in policies and in orders and in professional writing. By actions, I mean what Marine leaders have actually done and what they have failed to do. And I figure I'll get that from their own personal memoirs and from eyewitness accounts from the Marines they led. What follows is the evidence that I've found so far. Archival evidence regarding Marine Corps small unit leadership during the War of Independence is elusive. As James Fenimore Cooper observed in 1853, the documents connected with the early history of the Navy of the country were never kept with sufficient method, and the few that did exist have become much scattered and lost. Nonetheless, some aspects of leadership in the Continental Marines can be inferred from naval and military regulations from this period. The military regulations that govern the Continental Army are not alien to the spirit of today's leadership traits and principles. Major General Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben's regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States explicitly address the expectations the new country set for its small unit leaders. The captain's first object should be to gain the love of his men by treating with every possible kindness and humanity. He should know every man of his company by name and character. He must keep a strict eye over the conduct of the non-commissioned officers, oblige them to do their duty with the greatest exactness. He must never rudely reprimand them in the presence of the men, but at all times treat them with proper respect. It being the non-commissioned officers that the discipline and order of a company in a great measure depend, they cannot be too circumspect in their behavior towards the men by treating them with mildness and at the same time obliging everyone to do his duty. By avoiding too great a familiarity with the men, they will not only gain the love and confidence, but be treated with the proper respect. Whereas by contrary contact, they forfeit all regard and their authority becomes despised. Congress adopted Steuben's regulation for the Continental Army in 1779. It may be that the spirit of these regulations influenced Continental Marines serving under General George Washington. Major Samuel Nicholas and his small battalion fought with Washington during the Trenton and Princeton campaign battles and wintered with his army at Morristown, New Jersey in 1777. But most Continental Marines served on board ships of the Continental Navy, not with Washington's Army. Marine officers received little direction from anyone but their ship's captain. The rules for the regulation of the United States of the United Colonies of North America, for the Navy of the United Colonies of North America, passed by the Continental Congress 18 days after the founding of the Continental Marines, only tangentially addressed the leadership obligations of naval officers, charging captains to maintain discipline tempered with justice and to ensure their men receive their due allowances of pay, rations, and clothing. How these regulations applied to officers of the Continental Marines is not explicit, although a captain may be presumed to have expected the same from his Marine officers. Orders issued by ships' captains during the War of Independence provide slightly more insight into the expectations they held for their Marine commanders. In February 1778, Captain Samuel Tucker of the frigate Boston ordered his Marine commander, Captain Richard Palms, to exercise his Marines under arms to employ them as sentinels, quote, but they are not to be obliged to go aloft or be beat or punished for not showing an inclination to do so. Captain Tucker further ordered Palms to inspect the Marines' weapons, ammunition, and equipment to ensure they were ready for action. In turn, Captain Palms issued fighting instructions in which he directed his sergeants and corporals to ensure the Marines were armed and equipped in the best order possible and to keep under cover. No one is allowed to speak but the officers commanding or the sergeants, and a Marine who deserted his post during a fight would be shot on the spot. In 1777, at least one Marine officer, Captain Robert Mullen, this is the same Robert Mullen that every recruit can identify as the Corps' first recruiter, apparently let his company leave their Philadelphia landlord, quote, a dirty yard, burned the whole stairs in the kitchen, dresser, and mantelpiece, the whole yard full of human dung. Captain Joseph Hardy, commanding the Marines on board the Continental frigate Confederacy, kept a journal during his frigate's 1780 cruise in the Caribbean. Now, Hardy made almost daily entries during his 14 months aboard Confederacy. But what his journal says about his leadership is really what he does not say. He talks every day about the activities of his ship and their crew, but mentions his own Marines hardly at all. A few of his entries describe the actions of his sentinels, suppressing mutinous acts, preventing desertion. On 2 occasions, he matter-of-factly records the deaths of some of his Marines from illness. On only a handful of dates does he even reveal what his Marines were up to that day, which is typically making cartridges, drilling, and on one occasion, exercising under arms with powder for the first time. So my point is that Hardy's voluminous journal, so infrequently mentioned the efficiency and welfare of his own men, makes a reader wonder that he gave much thought to leading them. 3 decades later, during the War of 1812, First Lieutenant William Sharp Bush penned a letter which suggests he placed a good deal of importance on leading his Marines. After a period of absence, Bush returned on board the frigate Constitution. Quote, my men beamed on me a smile of joy. Welcome salutations meet my ears. From every quarter, to a man who has ever been anxious to gain and retain the good opinion of the world, those marks of approbation are certainly pleasing, especially from those who are immediately under my own superintendence. Those men I have had to punish occasionally, but can lay my hand on my heart and safely say that they have never been chastised unless it was their due. Now, Lieutenant Bush and 2 of his contemporaries, Lieutenant James Brugge on board Chesapeake and Lieutenant John Brooks on board Lawrence, established another tradition for Marine small unit leaders in the age of sail. Both officers gave their lives leading from the front in close quarter combat. Another 3 decades later, in 1845, Brevet Brigadier General Commandant Archibald Henderson ordered 2nd Lieutenant Henry Bowles Watson to take command of the Marine Guard on board the sloop of war USS Portsmouth. Henderson specifically instructed Watson to give, quote, careful attention to the military efficiency of the guard under your command and to the health and comfort of the soldiers comprising it. Watson's journal presents near daily observations covering his 3 years in command. Most of his entries chronicle occasional drill and marksmanship practice, guard routine, enforcing discipline, and is concerned with maintaining high standards. Watson took pride in his detachment, writing in June 1845, quote, I must here take occasion to say that the Marine Guard of this ship is one of the most superior I have seen, and maintain with increased luster the far-famed reputation of their corps. Watson frequently recorded the use of corporal punishment to enforce discipline. Insolence to a non-commissioned officer earned one of Watson's privates a dozen lashes with the Colt. Serious offenses, such as sleeping on duty or unauthorized absence, could earn an offender up to a dozen lashes with the cat o' nine tails. Watson confided his confliction over the use of the lash. Quote, he said, "There never was a more revolting and sickening exhibition than the bearing of the naked back of a man and lashing it till the blood clogs in the gashes made by the hard, twisted thongs of the cat o' nine tails. And indeed, I think there are cases when it could be propriety be dispensed with." Now, on the eve of the Civil War, Marine small unit leaders no longer relied on corporal punishment. Congress had abolished flogging in 1850, and the Navy regulations now included articles specifically addressing the responsibilities of the commanding Marine officer, including being particularly attentive to the comfort and cleanliness of his men. I combed through pretty much every Civil War memoir and journal that I could get my hands on, and I was looking for some great examples of Marines being small unit leaders, maybe a mutual affection between officers and their Marines, or some junior Marines complaining about their Marine officers and NCOs being martinets. But as any Marine who has spent a lot of time at sea knows, time at sea for Marines can be pretty boring. And these journals and memoirs are really boring. Entries are a repetition of guard duty, of drill, of inspections, and watching the world slip past, and only occasionally is there an account of some enemy action. And when there is, the action is covered with almost no detail and nothing really that's very descriptive. I have one small exception for you. Marine Lieutenant Frank Church left us a glimpse into being a leader in action. Steaming into battle in April 1864 aboard the gunboat USS Blackhawk, Lieutenant Church wrote, quote, "I took my place among my men as I was afraid if I stayed up on top where I had better protection, although I could use my rifle to much better advantage, then my men would think I was a little timid." So there we have it, one really good, brief glimpse into what it was like to be a small unit leader in the Civil War in the Marine Corps. Church's account does suggest that courage under fire and setting the example were leadership characteristics esteemed by Marine officers at this period. And Church was not alone. Valor under fire appears to have been a quality prevalent among Marine small unit leaders during the Civil War. As Dr. Alan Millett noted, 13 Medals of Honor were awarded to sergeants and corporals serving as gun captains, and ship's captains frequently lauded the performance of their Marines under fire. 2 decades later, Lieutenant Howard Gilman authored the first Marines Manual. The manual repeated the 1850 Navy regulation that, quote, "the Marine officer to be attentive to the comfort and cleanliness of his men," and added duties for the non-commissioned officer, declaring he should be held strictly accountable for the cleanliness of his men. Gilman also included an extract from U.S. Army regulations that, for the first time perhaps, prescribed some principles of leadership for Marines. Quote, "military authority is to be executed with firmness, but with kindness and justice to inferiors, and superiors of every grade are forbidden to injure those under them by tyrannical or capricious conduct or by abusive language." These admonitions were a step toward the philosophy of leadership extolled a century later in Leading Marines. The actions of Marine leaders sometimes got out of step with the words of the 1885 Marines Manual. According to Dr. Millett, Marine officers of this era, quote, "were not noted for ambition or intellect," and, quote, "their working hours were short and social engagements long and elegant." A more promising officer, Second Lieutenant Jean Lejeune, was aghast at the condition of his Marines' quarters at Norfolk. The barracks was a wretched wooden building and one big squad room in which all the men slept in 2-storied iron bunks. Sacks stuffed with straw constituted all the government furnished in the way of bedding. The ration, 14 cents per man per diem, was insufficient in quantity and there was but little variety. The supper, for instance, being limited to bread and coffee with molasses or a slice of cheese or bologna sausage. When Charles Haywood was appointed Colonel Commandant in 1891, 1/4 of his Marines were deserting every year. Turning morale around required reform by the new commandant and leadership from the Corps' officers. Haywood replaced the straw-filled sacks with real beds. He secured funding to double the Marines' rations. More conscientious young officers like Lejeune, quote, learn much of the practical side of the duties of a Marine officer, especially those related to the handling of men, from senior non-commissioned officers of their commands. At the Marine Barracks at Boston Navy Yard, Second Lieutenant Frederick Wise described his introduction to Marine leadership from Lieutenant Colonel Henry Cochran. I'm going to read this passage to you from Fritz Wise's book. You're going to love it. I love it. Hopefully you love it too. He was a product of the Civil War. To him, orders were to be obeyed. Work was to be done. No excuses, no explanations, no quarter to be given or expected. He had his barracks kept immaculately clean. Every article of the enlisted personnel he had inspected daily. Punishment descended instantly if anything was soiled, out of order, or out of place. Every detail of uniform for officers and men alike had to be above par. The condition of the men's food, its proper cooking and serving were of paramount importance to him. Days of torture for cooks, mess attendants, and the officer of the day followed when food came to the tables cold. The men must have their food hot and good. He kept officers and men on their toes 24 hours a day. Under his command, there was no passing the buck, no laziness, no indifference. In some strange way, nothing could take place without his immediate knowledge. Although we didn't see him in the flesh all the time, his presence was always with us no matter where we were. A man of no sympathy and no affection, but efficient to an unusual degree. A magnificent barracks and mess officer, a past master in discipline, cordially hated by men and officers alike. I learned a lot about soldiering from him. The following year, at the Marine Barracks at Cavite, Philippines, Wise learned another side of leadership from his senior non-commissioned officers. Wise wrote years later, I couldn't have been in better hands to learn practical soldiering. Problems I couldn't solve myself, they'd help me solve. I was trying my best to learn to handle men. It's the one thing you've got to know to be a decent officer. Wise and his Marines soon faced combat in the Boxer Rebellion, and the young lieutenant absorbed the professionalism of the Corps' small unit leaders as he watched them prepare the company for action. As the first sergeant issued orders to the company, the sergeants inspected the Marines, ensuring each had his weapon, ammunition, haversack, blanket roll, and canteen ready for action. When the first sergeant fell wounded, a sergeant instantly took his place. When the company commander was killed, First Lieutenant George Reed took command. In the 1913 edition of the Proceedings of the Naval Institute, Captain William Parker put down on paper, perhaps for the first time, a Marine philosophy of leadership. Quote, the first object for which the company officer must strive is the confidence of his men, and his success in this matter will depend largely upon the degree of care and interest in which he devotes to all matters affecting the material welfare of the men of the company. His hold is very dependent on his personal example in all the military virtues of obedience, industry, initiative, studiousness, cleanliness, sobriety, truthfulness, fairness, honor, morality, and military courtesy. A martinet has no place. In punishing men, the company officer should bear in mind that all men cannot be treated exactly alike and produce like results. A little time devoted to the study of the personalities of the men of the company will be profitably spent. One of the most important features of his work of instruction is the training of the non-commissioned officers, for there are few greater sources of weakness in a company than incompetent weaklings clothed with the authority of non-commissioned officers. Prior to the World War, the Landing Force and Small Arms Instruction of 1916 delineated leadership principles and techniques in greater detail than heretofore seen. The instruction declared a combat leader, quote, must possess endurance, courage, and good judgment, self-reliance, initiative, aggressiveness, and a conception of teamwork. A correct grasp of the situation and a definite plan of action form the soundest basis for successful combat. A good plan, once adopted and put into execution, should not be abandoned until it becomes clear that it cannot succeed. Complicated maneuvers are not likely to succeed. All plans must be simple and direct. Supervisors should be careful not to censure an apparent disobedience where the act was done in the proper spirit and to advance the general plan. When issuing orders, a commander should indicate clearly what is to be done by each subordinate, but not how it is to be done. He should not encroach upon the functions of a subordinate by prescribing details of execution unless he has good reason to doubt the ability or judgment of the subordinate and cannot substitute another. While the Landing Force and Small Arms Instruction provided techniques that would help Marine leaders lead and succeed in the coming World War, the naval services were indebted to the forward-thinking U.S. Army officers who had authored the infantry drill regulations of 1911. As much of it, including the passage I just read to you, was copied verbatim into the Landing Force and Small Arms Instruction. Now, the World War came, and the First World War brought unprecedented expansion to the Marine Corps. The end strength shot from under 14,000 to almost 73,000 in 18 months. By the armistice, fewer than 1 in 6 Marines had been in uniform when war had been declared 18 months prior. Yet modern combat required even more from the Corps' small unit leaders, as sergeants and corporals were now leading squads in combat and acting independently. That unprecedented expansion occurred amidst unprecedented casualties. The 8,100-strong 4th Marine Brigade suffered staggering losses from Bellawood through the Argonne. Such horrendous casualties over such a short period, 130% of the authorized strength of the brigade, threatened to cripple it. But the brigade was not crippled, in part because of the exceptional quality of Marine recruits. Recruiters had found they could select only the best men from the crowds of applicants who rushed to the colors. The commander of the 6th Marines estimated that 60% of his regiment had attended some college. And this is a bunch of men who were recruited from a male population of 18 to 24, in which only 1 out of every 30 of them attended college at all. And 60% of his privates are college men. Now, why is that important? The commandant, Major General George Barnett, recognized the quality of his men. And he therefore decided in June 1917, 3 months into the war, to appoint no more civilians to the rank of second lieutenant. He filled all officer vacancies by appointing meritorious, non-commissioned officers. Though there had been provisions to commission NCOs before World War I, commissioning the majority of the Corps' officers from the enlisted ranks was unprecedented. 654 enlisted men accepted appointments as second lieutenants during the First World War, whereas only 273 had come from civil life. Lieutenants Louis Kukla and Gerald C. Thomas demonstrate the wisdom of General Barnett's policy. Kukla had earned the Medal of Honor as a gunnery sergeant in the 5th Marines at Soissons. He received a field appointment as second lieutenant 2 months later. After the World War, he continued to serve as an officer in Haiti, Santo Domingo, the Philippines, China, and in World War II, he served stateside, finally retiring as a major. Thomas had fought as a sergeant with the 6th Marines at Bellawood and Soissons, and was also commissioned as second lieutenant in September 1918. He was with the 1st Marine Division as its operations officer and later chief of staff on Guadalcanal. He commanded the division in Korea. He was promoted to general upon his retirement here at Quantico as commandant of Marine Corps Schools in 1956, at which time he also helped write the First Marine Officer's Guide. The First World War had shaken the world order, societies, armies, and navies, and individuals. Major General Lejeune, who had commanded the U.S. 2nd Division and its Marine Brigade, was acutely aware of how the war had transformed the Corps and its Marines. It is worth noting that in the 1921 Marines Manual, his oft-quoted passage on the relations between officers and men began, quote, "The World War wrought a great change in the relations between officers and enlisted men in the military services. A spirit of comradeship and brotherhood in arms came into being in the training camps and on the battlefields. This spirit is too fine a thing to be allowed to die." While some of you are likely aware that the Marine Corps adopted the leadership traits and principles in leading Marines from 2 Cold War-era U.S. Army publications, General Lejeune had identified similar qualities of leadership back in 1920. Quote, "Each officer must endeavor by all means in his power to develop within himself those qualities of leadership, including industry, justice, self-control, unselfishness, honor, and courage, which will fit him to be a real leader of men. The relation between officers and enlisted men should in no sense be that of superior and inferior, nor that of master and servant, but rather that of teacher and scholar. In fact, it should partake of the nature of the relation between father and son, to the extent that officers, especially commanders, are responsible for the physical, mental, and moral welfare, as well as the discipline and military training of the men under their command who are serving the nation in the Marine Corps." In the Marine Corps Manual of 1921, Lejeune added energy, initiative, determination, enthusiasm, firmness, and kindness to the list of qualities he expected from his officers. The qualities Lejeune demanded from leaders in 1920 would endure as the heart of the Corps' philosophy of leadership for the next century. Small wars throughout the first 4 decades of the 20th century severely tested the leadership ability of the Corps' small unit leaders. Marine officers and non-commissioned officers led small patrols on extended operations far from higher headquarters. Some leaders became Marine legends. Some fell short of the Corps' expectations. In 1918, allegations arose that Captain Charles Merkel of the 3rd Marines had burned homes in the Dominican Republic and tortured and executed prisoners. While under arrest in quarters, Merkel, known as the Tiger of Cibo, conveniently took his own life before revelations at a court-martial could further embarrass the Corps. A few years later, on the other side of Hispaniola, Gunnery Sergeant Faustin Workus took on the job as commander of the Haitian district that included the island of Gonave. Workus took time to understand the local culture, respected local traditions, and led with compassion. He reduced corruption, reformed agriculture, and built an airfield. In 1926, the ruling 12 Congo societies named him their king, and he reigned there for 3 years until the president of Haiti forced his surrender. The Corps captured such experience in the 1940 Small Wars Manual. The manual included detailed instruction for small unit leaders, patrols, and native constabulary forces, and general principles applicable to the unique challenges of leading Marines in small wars. The application of the principles of psychology in small wars is quite different from their normal application in major warfare or even in troop leadership. The aim is not to develop a belligerent spirit in our men, but rather one of caution and steadiness. Members of the United States forces serving with the constabulary must possess good judgment and extreme patience, coupled with tact, firmness, justice, and control. Firmness without adequate means of support may degenerate into bluff. Tact alone may be interpreted as weakness. So this brought us to World War II. When the island battles of the Pacific War tested the Corps' small unit leaders in severe conditions and savage combat, long-serving Marines instilled the Corps' philosophy in its new officers and non-commissioned officers, but we should acknowledge that some did not all live up to the Corps' expectations. In his classic Pacific War memoir, Helmet for My Pillow, Private Robert Leckie decried the caste system that he perceived within his battalion. Leckie wrote of, quote, the single-sided coin, whereby the officers would satisfy their covetousness by forbidding us things rightfully ours and then take them up themselves. Rather than winning the love of Private Leckie, his officers instead earned descriptive sobriquets like Captain High Hips, Captain Headlines, Captain Midnight, Captain Dreadnought, Lieutenant Big Picture, Lieutenant Racehorse, and Lieutenant Ivy League. Leckie's memoir may suffer from some artistic license, but it nonetheless seems an authentic perspective of small unit leadership from the bottom up in the Pacific. Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson attempted to bring relations between officers and men to a different level in the 2nd Raider Battalion. According to historian John Hoffman, Carlson and his executive officer, Major James Roosevelt, quote, inculcated the unit with an unconventional military philosophy that was an admixture of Chinese culture, communist egalitarianism, and New England town hall democracy. Every man would have the right to say what he thought. Officers would have no greater privileges than the men and would lead by consensus rather than rank. While the Corps' philosophy of leadership provided a foundation for small unit leaders, the savage fighting in the Pacific revealed the requirement for practical, tactical leadership, field strip of philosophy. In early 1944, Major General Alan Turnage, commanding the 3rd Marine Division, issued battle doctrine for frontline leaders. After reiterating expectations of officers in simple language, the 3rd Marine Division prescribed such practical instructions as exercise and display absolute loyalty towards a superior, particularly when he is absent. Refrain from blowing up under stress. Insist on clean weapons, presence of arms, ammunition, mess gear, helmets, and other items of individual equipment, care of the feet, and alertness on watch. Do not get your unit lost. Do not call for volunteers to do a dangerous or distasteful job. Give your orders positively and clearly. Never allow cruelty. Bury the dead quickly. Send back information at least once in each hour. A frontline Marine demands little from his leader, namely a clear conception of what he is expected to do, ammunition, drinking water, rations, medical service, and eventually cigarettes and mail. These items must be your continuous concern. Arrange for the comfort of your men before you do your own. Win a reputation for moving your outfit promptly. Depart and arrive on time. Hold the attention of your enemy with a minimum of force, then quickly strike him hard on his flank and rear with every weapon you have, then rush him when his fire slackens. These no-nonsense techniques enabled platoons to fight as teams and win. The Commandant, General Alexander Vandegrift, issued the 3rd Marine Division's instructions corps-wide, stating, quote, "It is worthy of careful study by every Marine who is or may be charged with the leadership of other Marines in battle." And I think it's still worthy of that. If you take nothing else away from my presentation tonight, those of you still on active duty, get yourself a copy of the 3rd Marine Division Battle Doctrine for frontline leaders. It's worth it. Marines displayed uncommon valor on Iwo Jima. Small unit leaders turned that valor into victory. When commanders fell, subordinates stepped up. By the end of the fighting, privates led squads, corporals and sergeants led platoons, and gunnery sergeants, first sergeants, and lieutenants commanded the remnants of rifle companies. The Marine Corps way of small unit leadership gave its divisions resilience and brought victory. Perhaps no clearer example of the Corps' excellence at small unit leadership can be found than the 1st Marine Division saga at the Chosin Reservoir. In T.R. Fehrenbach's classic work, This Kind of War, he wrote, quote, "In 1950, a Marine Corps officer was still an officer, and a sergeant behaved the way good sergeants had behaved since the time of Caesar, expecting no nonsense, allowing none. And Marine leaders had never lost sight of their primary, their only mission, which was to fight. The Marine Corps was not made pleasant for men who served in it." The Vietnam War challenged small unit leaders in new formidable ways. Infantry Marines spent most of their 13-month tours living in combat conditions. Rifle companies in the field were not immune to the effect of the war's unpopularity and to racial disharmony in the United States. Wartime expansion forced the Corps to accept more high school dropouts and substantial numbers of draftees, while defense policy required the Marine Corps to reject some higher quality men in order to induct its share of mental group 4 applicants. To meet its burgeoning need for junior officers, the Corps commissioned many staff non-commissioned officers. This policy cascaded across the NCO ranks, reducing their average time in service by half. Small unit leaders contended with drug use and discontent while valiantly fighting a complex and controversial war. And the Corps' junior non-commissioned officers proved up to the task. Sergeants and corporals led their squads and fire teams in heavy fighting, just as their predecessors had done. Junior NCOs led reconnaissance teams on multi-day patrols far from friendly forces. In an innovative attempt to secure the population, Marine NCOs led their squads in partnership with Popular Forces platoons in the Combined Action Program, training, advising, fighting, and directing supporting arms. The program demanded exceptional patience, maturity, and leadership from its junior non-commissioned officers. One Marine who served under Lieutenant Colonel William G. Leftwich in Vietnam described him as the penultimate leader, always concerned about his Marines and seemingly one step ahead of the enemy. Leftwich had earned the Navy Cross in a 1965 action while an advisor to Vietnamese Marines, and he was killed in 1970 during an extract of one of his reconnaissance teams when the aircraft crashed. In 1979, the Marine Corps instituted the Leftwich Award for outstanding leadership by a company or battery commander, and later erected a statue of Colonel Leftwich at the basic school. This commemoration of Colonel Leftwich's example of leadership heralded the expectations the Marine Corps has of its small unit leaders. Even before the Vietnam War, the basic school's mission had been to, quote, produce a graduate who is immediately capable of leading a rifle platoon and leading it in a firefight. But Marines had long expressed skepticism that leadership qualities could be developed through classroom instruction. The Corps had refrained from attempting to instruct its philosophy of leadership to its officers and non-commissioned officers until after the Second World War. In Major General Lejeune's remarks to the Army General Staff College in 1921, he acknowledged that, quote, education assists but little. It is a matter of dealing with the emotions, the spirit, the souls of the troops. In a 1936 Marine Corps Gazette article, the Assistant Commandant of Marine Corps Schools, Colonel Charles Miller, wrote, quote, we should not gain the impression that knowledge of leadership is obtained solely from books. And the passage from the 1956 Marine Officers Guide that proclaimed that leadership is a heritage further noted that working with other Marines is the Marine Leaders School. Marine Corps schools implemented leadership evaluation but were reluctant to incorporate leadership instruction. By 1948, though candidates attending the platoon leaders class received no classroom instruction on leadership. They were evaluated throughout the course on leadership characteristics. Around this time, the basic school allocated just 15 instructional hours to leadership. By 1964, students at the basic school spent 22 of their 1,049 hours learning about leadership, which included 5 hours of, quote, leadership problems. 4 years later, Marine Corps schools doubled the number of hours devoted to leadership to 55, and 25 years later, the basic school had repurposed much of its tactical training as hands-on leadership experience and evaluation to devote 225 of its 1,049 instructional hours to leadership. In 1968, the NCO school at Quantico devoted 13 instructional hours to leadership, all through lecture and written examination. In 1990, that increased to 22 hours, and lectures were augmented with guided discussions and practical application. The Staff Non-Commissioned Officers Academy was devoting 37 of its 188 instructional hours to leadership in 1974. General Al Gray, Commandant of the Marine Corps from 1987 to 1991, saw the Marine Corps style of leadership as a critical component of the Marine Corps style of warfare. And the 1989 Foundational Doctrine, FMFM-1 Warfighting, declared, quote, the Marine Corps style of warfare requires intelligent leaders with a penchant for boldness and initiative down to the lowest levels. Boldness is an essential moral trait in a leader, for it generates combat power beyond the physical means at hand. Initiative, the willingness to act on one's own judgment, is a prerequisite for boldness. These traits carried to an excess can lead to rashness, but we must realize that errors by junior leaders stemming from overboldness are a necessary part of learning. We should deal with such errors leniently. There must be no zero defects mentality. So my assigned topic for this lecture was Marines place great emphasis on small unit leadership. One need look no further than the archives of the Marine Corps Association for clear evidence that Marines have placed great importance on small unit leadership for over a century. Marines appear to love writing and reading about leadership because the Gazette has published over 400 such articles since 1916. These 404 articles represent a significant percentage of the Gazette's total articles over this period. Recurring themes include extolling selflessness, decrying micromanagement, and highlighting policies and practices that seem out of step with the Corps' leadership philosophy. A great example was written by Colonel Brian McCoy after leading his battalion in Iraq. Rather than espousing a new 21st century key that would unlock the secrets to leading Generation X Marines, McCoy's article resonates with admonitions that small unit leaders from the Boxer Rebellion to Vietnam would recognize. This was deliberate. Colonel McCoy confessed up front that he had never been accused of having an original thought. His article included leadership basics such as pre-combat checks and inspections and post-combat checks and inspections are standing operating procedures and are at the very heart of leadership. The best way to take care of our wounded is to finish the enemy. Treat the dead, friendly and enemy, with respect. Keep our honor clean. To wrap up this presentation, I'd like to summarize what I think the words and actions of Marines are telling us about small unit leadership over the last 250 years. Across the first 125 years of the Corps' existence, all officers were small unit leaders, as all Marine units were small. That said, small unit leadership in the Age of Sail consisted primarily of inspecting, maintaining high standards of discipline, sometimes through harsh punishment, and leading with courage under fire. The Corps' enduring philosophy of leadership, exemplified by the traits and principles of leading Marines, did not emerge until the transformative period between Commandants Haywood to Lejeune, a transformation that the First World War accelerated. That philosophy has changed but slightly over the past century. Along the way, tactical and practical expectations of small unit leaders in combat have emerged. The Corps' small unit leaders have had to adapt and surmount unique challenges in the wars of the 20th and 21st centuries. Nonetheless, I believe lieutenants and sergeants, at least as far back as the Boxer Rebellion, would see more than a little of themselves in today's Marine Corps. In that sense, leadership truly is a heritage of the Corps. Okay, that completes my remarks. We're not going anywhere though, because this is the part where I get to learn from you and maybe get some good ideas from you and hopefully answer some of your questions. And I think Dr. Callan's got a microphone, so we're going to use that.
Good evening, this is Major Robinson. I'm a student over at the command and staff. Thanks for being here tonight and everybody else for helping make this happen. It's been great. So my question to you, sir, is from what you've seen in the immense research you've done on the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s, have you seen any evolutions in small unit leadership from the 20 years that you served in the Marine Corps?
Sure. What I would say is what I found the most useful today that I think I would have wished I'd had somebody given me at the basic school in 1986 were those instructions from the 3rd Marine Division, because we learned a lot about troop leading steps where you make an estimate of the situation, you come up with your plan and do your recon, all that stuff. But these like really down and dirty, like, you know, bury the dead quickly. You know, that's like something you don't really think about until you're in combat, and then it's all of a sudden you have a decision to make. So I think those were obviously really practical instructions that small unit leaders could benefit from, rather than understanding traits and principles, which are all well and good and really important in a peacetime Marine Corps, but you need to translate that into, this is what I really need you to do on the battlefield, Lieutenant, right? So I think from all the things I looked at the whole 200 years, that's the gem.
Oh, thanks, sir.
Leila, hi.
Hi.
My name is Leila, and I'm a student at the McMoore.
Yep.
So my question is really geared to modernization of resources with the small units. How did that trickle down to the small units, or really did it stay within the headquarter control? And how would you change today?
Sure. Well, one of the things that you get from modernization, beginning in World War I, but seen much more so beginning with Vietnam, is the modernization of technology improves and accelerates the reach and the flow of information. So what that translates to small unit leaders is, in World War II, you now have lieutenants carrying radios. And in Vietnam, you now have squad leaders carrying radios. And in the global war on terror, you now have corporals, fire team leaders, and even individual Marines carrying radios. And what that means, how that challenges small unit leaders, is there's a temptation for the higher echelons, like you mentioned, to try and maintain more and more control because they could talk to everybody. But what it really does is it spreads out the battlefield in time and in space. So it places more responsibility on those junior NCOs and lieutenants because they're operating more independently. So they need to understand their commander's intent, and they need to be able to act within their situation as they realize it at that time. So for me, the modernization of technology, which is one of the resources I think you're referring to, basically empowers junior leaders to act independently on the battlefield, but it behooves higher leaders to give them the latitude to do that, which we see people talking about way back in 1916 in the landing force instructions, that they need to just tell people what to do and not how to do it. So am I hitting what you were asking about?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Keep the mic moving back, and then we'll come back down.
Paul Westermeyer,
Hey, how you doing, Paul?
Marine Corps History Division.
Yep.
Comments and some questions. Going back to the beginning and the heritage idea, I find that Marines often assume a uniqueness, especially in our early days, that isn't present. For example, you had Lieutenant Bush, who was the first Marine officer killed in combat. Not the first Marine officer killed. In fact, many Marine officers have been killed prior to that, all in duels. Marines had killed a lot of other Marines
Okay.
in dueling prior to that date. There's a famous quote where the official first Commandant Burroughs talks about how the later on court-martialed Commandant Gale had called out a naval officer who insulted him, shot and killed him.
Okay.
My point is that when we talk about the leadership from the front, the combat leadership, for the early 19th century, certainly, and throughout most of this, the Marines are not part of a specifically Marine Corps culture. This is broad military culture and also broad U.S. culture. Southern dueling culture, of course, is well known, and the dueling was what you did to show your manhood. It wasn't so much about if you killed the other guy, it was that you showed your willingness to take fire. to stand while
Right.
somebody pointed and shot at you. I guess my point here is, at what point do you think, assuming that you see this shift, that the Marine Corps' emphasis on small unit leadership becomes something that isn't simply the Marine Corps being a military organization of its time, but something that is becoming uniquely Marine?
Yep. First off, that's a great perspective on the dueling, Paul. I hadn't thought about that because in my mind, of course, dueling is misconduct and valor under fire is something to be prized. But in the mind of the individual, it's part of the same culture, the culture, I guess, of honor and everything. So that's a great point. So I'm gonna add that to my essay somehow. But as far as like, when does the Marine Corps' leadership philosophy, I think, become something uniquely Marine? It's much later, because if you notice, a constant theme in my slides is there's a lot of U.S. Army stuff in here, right? There's a lot, and I even pointed out, like, somebody at the History Division had pointed out somewhere, there's a Marine Corps University page like, hey, here's leadership traits and principles, and they are drawn from this U.S. Army publication. All absolutely true, but then I started looking at what Lejeune was saying 30 years earlier, and it's like, well, they really came from Lejeune, and then they just copied this Army thing that maybe they copied from Lejeune or resonated or whatever. But I think there's a lot of U.S. Army influence there. And I think this is going to dovetail into what Dr. Folsey is going to talk about and Dr. Venables going to talk about, where the Marine Corps starts to cultivate a unique identity. And when it does, it starts to cultivate, these are uniquely things. So, you know, Marines are like soldiers, only more so, right? So Marines are disciplined, more disciplined than these guys. We are leaders. We do leadership better than these other guys. We take care of our troops even better than Army officers do. That's what I suspect.
Good evening, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Komodo, CSC CG4. My question is the leadership of volunteer force versus the leadership on conscription force. So I think after Vietnam War in 1973, the United States stopped the conscription system.
Yes.
So I think, generally speaking, the quality of volunteer force different from, you know, the conscription force. So in that sense, did this policy change, you know, shifting from conscription to volunteer, give any impact on small leadership style?
Sure. I understand the question, and thanks for asking it. I can say some intelligent things in relation to that question, but I don't think I can give you a direct answer that's going to answer all of it. So when I first think about what's the impact on conscription on Marine Corps small unit leaders, I go back to the First World War, and basically everybody who went into the U.S. Army was conscripted. You couldn't even walk into the recruiter and volunteer. You had to go through selective service. So a U.S. Army officer had a much greater challenge of leading all conscripted people, whereas all Marines were volunteers. What it enabled a Marine recruiter to do, such as this happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, in my slide, they had 150 people show up right after war was declared, say, we all want to join the Marines. And they only took 26. They sent the rest packing. So they're able to handpick who they want to be Marines. And they're only taking the best people, which makes the small unit leader's job much better. I also showed how in World War I, only 1 out of every 6 Marines had been in uniform when war was declared. But if you translate that to the Army went from about 200,000 to 4 million. So in the same rifle company in the Army, it's only 1 out of every 25 had been in uniform before war was declared. So they have a much bigger challenge. Now, conscription comes into the Marine Corps later in World War II and later in Vietnam. And I think it's unique in the Marine Corps because for the same reason, just like in World War I, you know, the wartime volunteers were not such a large percentage as they were in the Army of the overall strength. In World War II and in Vietnam, the draftees were not the majority of platoons and companies. They were a significant portion, but I feel like they would have assimilated the culture of their fellow recruits through boot camp and everything else. And you even hear people talking about how, wow, I never knew this outstanding leader was a draftee. My senior drill instructor at Parris Island had been drafted, and he became a tunnel rat in Vietnam, and he got the Bronze Star, and he was a hero. So I think the fact that somebody was conscripted into the Marine Corps is such a different experience than being conscripted into the Army, that the leadership challenge that the small unit leaders faced wasn't nearly as terrible.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
We have time for 2 more questions. Good. I want to make sure we get to this side of the room.
Yeah, definitely give it to that guy in the red shirt.
Pete, good to see you.
Iggy.
Okay, so you had a slide that talked about leadership and the actions regarding words and actions.
Yes.
Okay. So
Thanks for staying awake. That was right at the beginning.
at the beginning. You had my attention.
Okay.
So, starting around 2010, as we put out Commander's Intent when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, we added the word images to that. Make sure all our words, actions, and images are
Okay.
consistent with Commander's Intent, end state conditions, and so forth. I'm very confident we added the word images to that because of the role social media played on what was happening on the battlefield.
Right.
In fact, the images were instantly going from what we did downrange to the home front.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how does social media play into small unit leadership and the way we lead and the compassion and empathy we share with our Marines as we do our missions?
Okay. I think I can say something intelligent to that, but I can't give you the right answer. This is how we should do it. But when I'm listening to what you're saying, what I'm thinking about is all the wars of the 20th and 21st century presented small unit leaders in the Marine Corps with unique challenges they had to overcome. I honestly think that Vietnam may have been the hardest for small unit leaders because of the field conditions, because of the chaotic nature of the war, because of everything that was going on at home and everything going on in the Marine Corps. But as each war presents unique challenges, the fundamental leadership traits and principles are still what the Marine Corps is going to try and apply. They're just going to come up with new techniques to apply them. So fortunately, I got to retire before social media became an important part of what my Marines were doing. But I'm sure that small unit leaders today, maybe some of you majors and captains are here in the room, could talk about how you surmount the challenge of leading Marines who are engaged with social media, or maybe how you use social media to engage with them. Okay? So really, I'm sidestepping your question, Colonel Liberto. So,
Thanks, Pete.
All right, any last question? All right, I have, there you go.
Paul Owen, former naval submarine officer, and your brother.
it's my smarter brother.
Yeah, I was thinking about the situation the Marines found themselves in Dominican Republic and Haiti, small unit leaders engaging with local population.
Right.
Wondering to what extent that paralleled similar situations in Afghanistan and Iraq 80, 90 years later. Were the traits that helped small unit leaders in those situations, did they parallel well, or was the situation significantly different, that there were new challenges? To what extent did the doctrine extend, derive, or evolve from 80 or 90 years before?
Okay. All right. That's a really good question, Paul. It's also a softball question for me, because the Marine Corps certainly believes so. In fact, that 1940 Small Wars manual that I quoted from when I finished up the Small Wars, the Marine Corps reissued that after 9/11 as doctrine, and they encouraged the Marine Corps to read it. And in my command and staff course now, there's still extracts from the Small Wars manual that majors are required to read as part of that course, because there are so many timeless lessons, or at least examples that they can extrapolate from. Now, there's also some outdated stuff. To be honest, there's some racial elements to the 1940 Small Wars manual that we certainly don't value today. But definitely there are things you can learn from there. And as a lot of people, a lot smarter than me, have said, if you want to get a new idea, read an old book. And the 1940 Small Wars manual is one of those old books.